Good morning. It's good to see everyone here this morning. I know we still have some folks trickling in, getting seats, but I wanted to introduce you to my family. My parents, Randy and Vicky Matheny, are here this morning. They've been in Brazil for this November will be 35 years. They went down when I was just about a year and a half old, and my brother and sister, my brother's 3 years younger, my sister is 9 years younger, and they were born down there. So I could say a whole lot more, but I don't want to take too much of his time this morning. I do enjoy getting to hear Dad speak. I don't get to do that very often anymore since we're here in the States and they're still in Brazil. But wanted to have an opportunity to share him with you guys this morning and let him talk a little bit about the work and some of the things they're doing down there. So,
thank you, Micah. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I have two objectives that I want to share with you this morning. Number one is I want to encourage you in your faith so that you may perceive and feel and experience the power of God in your life for salvation. And number two, the second thing I would like to encourage you this morning is for you to know that the gospel can reach other people as well. Sometimes we get a little bit pessimistic about sharing the gospel with others. And I'm going to share some examples with you this morning that I hope will motivate you and encourage you in your faith as you share the gospel with other people. And so this morning I have as my theme, I just want to go to heaven. And I'm going to explain where that phrase comes from in just a little bit, as it shows that the gospel is indeed God's power to save. As Micah mentioned, Vicki and I have celebrated a lot of milestones in our lives. We've been 35 years as of this coming November living and working in Brazil. We have our own home. We have our own routine in southeast Brazil, close to São Paulo, in the city of São José dos Campos. August 3rd, she and I celebrated 40 years of marriage. So that was another milestone for us just recently. And right before we left Brazil on the 29th of July, we've been here almost a month. We're going home this week on Wednesday. But just before we left Brazil, I told Vicky, I said, let's get a few of our friends together. And this was like, I sent out the invitation on Wednesday before Sunday afternoon, and we had 50 people show up at our house. We didn't know what to do with all of them. So, and all of them except 7 stayed for our worship service that evening in our home. So we had to do everything in our backyard. 3 children married, and I'm going to share some pictures here. Our youngest daughter just got married on the 10th. And both Vicky and I have adapted well to the culture. We are fluent in the Portuguese language, so we can speak and teach, and I do a lot of publication as well. I put in this slide just for y'all. This is Micah sitting in our lap when he was a year and a half old. This was taken shortly after we arrived in Brazil. Vicky and I are now officially empty nesters, although Layla has been here in the United States now for about 7 years, I think. So we've been 7 years, just the two of us, and I took my office home. So we did kind of a renovation there and did all of that. So Joel's living in Mount Juliet, Tennessee with his wife and 2 children. Layla is living and working in Jackson, Tennessee, and her husband Ethan has another year to finish at Freed-Hardeman. So Layla married Ethan Washington August 10th, and that was the big event for us. On this trip, we're spending a month here now in the United States, besides doing some reporting to congregations, to supporters and whatnot. But here's the big question. If you're 20 years old, you probably don't think about this. I don't see any 20 years old here. They're probably up in the class. If you're 40, you're beginning to think about this. If you're like me, yesterday I celebrated 62 years of life, and I think a lot about this. And it's this question: what legacy will we leave when we leave this earth? This building right here is the second largest Catholic building in the world, just behind the Vatican in Rome. It's about an hour and a half from our house, and it's called the Basilica of Nossa Senhora de Aparecida. This building is huge. It took 25 million bricks to build this thing, and it can hold up to 40,000 people at one time. That's a legacy that somebody has left. The Taj Mahal is a legacy that somebody has left. The pyramids is a legacy that somebody has left. But you know what? One of these days, this building is going to disappear. One of these days, the pyramids, as old as they are, is going to be destroyed. At some point in the future, and it may be the coming of Christ, the Taj Mahal will cease to exist. Everything that is material, everything that is of substance will cease to exist. So the question is, what is it we're going to leave people here? And so Vicki and I have worked, even from the very beginning when Micah was born. Our legacy, our desire is to leave with our children and with the people whom we touch in this world one thing, and that is eternal life. That is something that can never be taken away from a person. We are so grateful to have in our lives the gospel of Jesus Christ that saves eternally. And even more, we are grateful that God has given us not only salvation, but He's also given us the opportunity to share that salvation with other people. Now that's just astounding. The Lord takes broken vessels like you and me and not only redeems us and transforms us, but He also puts within us, Paul will say, the treasure of the gospel. And we have that not just to guard for ourselves, but we have that to share as well. And so we see our children sharing that same kind of a perspective. In 2018, Joel and his family, that's our second son, came down to Brazil and spent almost a year with us. They left Brazil in June of last year. But this year, our son Joel, and that's the big tall guy with the beard in the background, all right? The red-headed guy. That's our son Joel. He went to Brazil twice this year so far. Up on the mouth of the Amazon River to the city of Belém do Pará, where he spent a week in April and also in July. So he's been there twice so far this year. We did not get to see him either time because we're in the southeast part of the country and he's up in the north. He was working there and he was teaching and translating and evangelizing, and on that second trip there were 3 baptisms. So we've tried to instill that spirit and that drive, that motivation in our children and the people we work with. This is my neighbor Paulo. I've been visiting with Pablo here, and I almost called him Pablo, but it's Paulo. The house across from our street, the owners moved, and they put the house for sale or to rent, and that house stayed empty for over a year. When I would leave our house or I would return home, I would look across the street and see that sign and say a prayer. And I would say, Lord, send us a family here to live in this house who will be open to the gospel. Well, after a while, a family moved in. And on the back of their car, there was a decal for the big mega church of the city. And I was a little disappointed, and I complained to the Lord about that. But one Sunday morning, he was out, put his car out in the street, and he was washing his car. And I was thinking about how I could meet him and begin this process of evangelizing. So I rushed into the kitchen and I asked my wife if she had any trash that she needed to be carried out, because the trash bin was up at the end of the street. That's the only time in my life, married life, when I've asked to take out the trash. It will probably be the last time. But there he was out on the street, so I took a bag of trash and walked up to the trash bin, and as I came back down, I met him. And there began our relationship. Invited him. We began in 2014 with a congregation in our home. So we've been concentrating since that time on what most people call house churches. We think there are a lot of advantages to that kind of an approach. So just every little bit we would invite him to our home. One evening, I was out on the sidewalk welcoming people as they were coming into the house there, and I saw Paulo come out of his house and down the street, and I was excited. I thought, it's time for church, so I bet he's coming to participate with us. So I greeted him and said, are you coming to visit with us? And he falls into my arms and starts bawling. And so for about 5 minutes or 10, He's there, I'm holding him, and he's crying his eyes out, and people are coming and passing us by, and they don't know what to think. Well, there had been a big crisis in their family, and he didn't come to church that night, but he and I began to study together. We studied for a year and a half every week. Sometimes we would study 3 times a week, the two of us. He's the owner of the gym down on the main avenue. When Joel and Tansy were living in Brazil, they worked out there because they lived down the street, so it was very convenient for them. And Vicki, in order to be close to the grandkids, she began there. I was working out at CrossFit close to my office, and so finally I began to gravitate as well toward that way. So I see this guy almost every day of the week. After a year and a half, he listens to the pastor at his church talk about baptism, and it clicks with him. He knows that he did not receive a biblical baptism, so he has to be baptized. And he is, in spite of opposition of his family. And he's been one of the most faithful people. He and I continue to work out. So the two of us have been together a lot over the past couple of years. And this is Paulo's phrase. He says it all the time, every day, to absolutely everybody. He says, I just want to go to heaven. Now he says that in Portuguese, all right? He says, eu quero ir para o céu. Eu só quero ir para o céu. And he says that to absolutely everybody. And he's been a great motivation for our congregation. He's a new convert. He was baptized in February of this year. And here's a man who was involved up to his neck in a different religion. But because of this moment in his life, he was open to the gospel. He was always somebody who was interested in reading the Bible. And before he was baptized, he finished reading the whole New Testament. And I think just as we came here to the United States, he finished the New Testament for a second time. How's that for a new convert? How are you in your Bible reading? So he's a great motivation to all of us. He still studies with me at least once a week, sometimes twice. And you know when we study? Usually it's Friday night after the gym closes at 9 o'clock. He goes home and he eats supper, and then he takes a bath. And about 10 o'clock, he and I are beginning to study. And we study till about noon. And the weekend before we left Brazil, he also likes to study sometimes on Saturday mornings before he opens up the gym at 8 o'clock. So he's knocking on my door at 6:30 in the morning. So here we studied Friday night. We finished up at 12. At 6:30 the next morning, he's back again. And when he can convince my wife to fix breakfast for us, he loves her biscuits. He loves her brownies. So she's one of the best evangelists that we have in Brazil. So when he can convince my wife, she'll fix breakfast for us around 7:30. So he and I will study from 6:30 to 7:30. We'll eat breakfast together, and then he'll go on and open up the gym together. I have learned when I go work out, I must take my glasses, because inevitably he has his Bible laying on his desk there in the gym, and he's going to reference a scripture, and probably he's going to go grab his Bible and open it up and say, look at this, see what I've been reading here, blah, 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 and he'll have a question or a comment or something, and if I don't have my glasses, I'm in trouble. So this is a guy who talks to absolutely everybody. As I mentioned, I moved my office to home. Since we're empty nesters, I converted one of the bedrooms and I closed the back porch in. And so we have a good place to study together. Vicki and I have studied with Paulo's parents. They are very dedicated in their religion, and so we have studied with them somewhat. We were not able to finish. Also, Paulo said, you know what I'd like to do? He said, I would like for us to have a study here at the gym. So every other Thursday night, beginning about 9:30 p.m., we have a study at the gym after everybody finishes up their routines. And I try to go not more than 30 minutes because the next morning everybody has to work and everybody has to get up early. So I usually try to finish within about 30 minutes. Paulo and I sat down the other day, and in the year and a half that we've been doing this, there have been at least 30 people, 30 non-Christians, who have at one point or another participated and heard something about the true gospel. So this guy, he talks to everybody. One of the students, Vicki has been studying with, she's a young single lady, 23 years of age, and she loves Vicki's brownies. And so sometimes Vicki would fix brownies after this study on Thursday nights, and so that gave her a little extra motivation to participate. And this anniversary bash that we had at our house, she stayed that night for our meeting, and she's been participating in the meeting since then. And the meeting has even moved to the south side of town since our house is not available. And by the way, Paulo preached the first 2 Sundays I was gone. This is a guy who was baptized in February, and he's already preaching. Now, he's not got that nice 3-point sermon down, but he does a good job from what everybody has said. So Bruna has been studying with Vicki, and I have also been studying with 2 people from the gym. This 15-year-old boy that you see here at the bottom, Sydney, he's an altar boy in the Catholic Church. And he came to study with me. He comes to the home office there, and we study together. And he has come because Paulo has encouraged him to study. And this guy, Pedro Tavio, has been studying with me as well. He works with Paulo at the gym. He's one of the trainers there. And he's also a family friend, so there are several connections there together. And Paulo talks to him all the time, but he's gotten involved in an African spiritist religion called Umbanda. And he's really taken up with Vicki a lot. Vicki goes usually in the morning, and I usually have been going at nighttime to work out at the gym. And so one morning, about 11 o'clock or so, Vicki was finishing up, and Pedro had a question for Vicki about spiritual things. And so Vicki knew that he was involved in this religion, and she said, well, tell me a little bit about, what you practice. What kind of a religion do you have? So he spent, 5 or 10 minutes talking about the kind of religion he has. And at the end, she said, well, that's all very fine and good, but you never once mentioned Jesus. And that just kind of clicked with him. And he understood with that one question, with that one comment of hers, that the religion he was involved in was not something that God approved of because it ignored Jesus. And because of that, he and I began studying together. We usually prefer that men study with men and women study with women. It just simplifies things a lot. But there are exceptions to that. So there in the gym, Vicki had an hour-long study with Pedro. She went and grabbed Paulo's Bible off of Paulo's desk and started showing him some passages together. And because of that, Pedro and I have started studying together as well. Well, you always are concerned a little bit when you travel, like we do. Sometimes we're gone for a month, all total, sometimes even a little bit more than that. But the work continues in our absence. Other Christians open up their homes to meet. This is a meeting in the house of Dona Francinecci on the south side of town. And that's where they're meeting while we're gone this time. As I mentioned, Paulo preached the first 2 Sundays that we were gone. And tonight, a young married man will preach tonight who was baptized in June. So how's that for growing together a little bit? But our work focuses mainly on personal evangelism. I've been involved in almost everything in 35 years in Brazil. We've been involved in Christian child care, Christian orphanage. We've been involved in Christian camp, especially when our 3 children were going to camp. I was on the board of directors for that. I've been involved in a lot of training programs, preacher training programs as well across Brazil. I travel a lot still to go teach in different places. I was in January up in the interior of the state of Pernambuco, and I'll be going back there again this January. So I do a lot of things around in Brazil, but we've discovered that there is nothing more effective than one-to-one contact, face-to-face, you getting to know people and helping them to come to know the gospel. And we're still in the early stages, but I believe that probably the house church is our most effective approach as well, because we are not tied to money to be able to start new works and to get things going. We're hoping that before long, this guy who's preaching here, he lives in the city next to us. He and his wife. There's a young couple that was just baptized in June who also live on their street. They're their neighbors. There's a young man who participates with us who also lives in that city. And we keep telling them, there's going to come the day when we're going to boot you guys out of here so that you'll start where you are. Now that has to be their decision. That has to be their timing. I would have liked for that to have happened already. But this couple, the guy here and his wife is sitting on the couch there on the left, in the middle. This is our living room. And this couple have had a lot of difficulties. They had a daughter to be born who had Down syndrome, and at 9 months old, she passed away. Then Ludmila got pregnant again, and they lost that child. And day before yesterday, the 23rd, is that right? The 23rd, they had their third child. But it was a very critical pregnancy. She had to have her uterus removed. She lost 2/3 of her blood. So they took the baby early. So they've had a lot of things going on in their lives. But you know what? I think the Lord is using this to help them grow in faith so that when they begin their work in the city of Jacareí, they are going to be even better equipped to do what the Lord has called them to do. And that's a principle for all of us. We think, why do I have all of these problems? And I want to tell you, I've had more than my share of problems over the past 35, 40 years that we've been together and that we've been in Brazil. And do you know what? The Lord uses all of that. You know what Romans 8:28 says, don't you? We know that God acts, God helps, God makes everything to work out to be good for those who loved Him, who were called according to His purpose. And He's going to use every single thing that happens in your life. God wants to use it for your good. God does not make evil into good, but He does use evil, and He is so powerful that He does use evil to produce good things in your life, just as He used the evil that was done to Jesus for our salvation. So we're tickled that we have men. I invest a lot of time in these men. Douglas and I are meeting once a week for breakfast every morning at one of the bread stores there close by, and we talk about our lives and our difficulties, and we talk about the work, and it's just kind of an open subject. And before we left Brazil, I think we spent 3 hours together, just talking and praying together. And Gustavo's girlfriend Malu was baptized also in June. This is a young man that I baptized along with his mother a few years back. This young lady had absolutely no religious background. She was almost a clean slate. And Vicky studied with her using our series, Know God. These nice pools that you see do not belong to us. This pool here belongs to a neighbor down the street from us. And they have an extra lot next to their house and a nice pool. And they belong to another religion. But one day I was without any kind of option to baptize anybody, and I called him. I said, would you mind if I use your pool for about 5 minutes? And I explained what I wanted to do, and he was more than happy. And I've baptized probably 10 people or more in this particular pool. And every time I do, I send him an email, and I say, Milton, thanks so much for letting us use your pool. And usually he writes back and says something like this. He says, I'm very glad that this pool can be used for such holy purposes. That's tremendous. In June also, we baptized this couple that I mentioned that are neighbors of Douglas and Ludmila. And I think this even has a little video to it. Is that video going to go anywhere? No? Is it working? Yeah, okay, all right, good. It's not doing it here, but it's doing it up there. That's good. He was of one religion and she was of another religion. And they went to a birthday party. They kind of knew each other on the street, and they went to a birthday party for Douglas and Ludmila's son, Davi. And she saw all of those people there. And Fabiana asked Ludmila, where did all these people come from? And she said, this is our spiritual family. And Fabiana said, I want that. I want to be a part of that. And so the two of them began to study together. And so, after a while, Vicky and I studied with the couple as a whole. Eliseo travels every week almost, all over Brazil and sometimes in South America with his work. So it's kind of hard to get together with him. But Douglas had a number of good conversations with him. And at the end, Vicky and I studied together with them, and they decided to be baptized into Christ. And so we hope that this couple, Douglas and Ludmila, along with Jonathan, who lives also in Jacareí, that at some point they're going to say, it is time for us to begin a work here in our city. There have been attempts made in the past that were unsuccessful. Lord willing, we're going to have the opportunity to have another go at a new work, at a new congregation in this city that has never known the true gospel. Is that finished? Okay. There we go. We're good. So what do we have? We have people evangelizing people. And the evangelism, here's the thing. The evangelism does not depend upon one person. It does not depend upon a paid evangelist or missionary or preacher for the growth to occur. And that is why we began in 2014 in our home, because previous models that we have even worked with, the evangelism centers in one person. And we wanted to break out of that mold. That is not the biblical mold. The biblical mold is that we all have the responsibility to learn how to share the gospel and teach others so that others can have the opportunity that we have been given. Because each of us has opportunities. Each of us knows people that others are not going to be able to influence. So each of us has an important role, an essential place in God's plan. So we've used our home, we've used our table, but it's not just our efforts. It's the efforts of other people as well. That's our house in the background. We have a small house. It's 3-bedroom, 2-bath, but it's kind of tight. It's great for us right now at the moment since we're empty nesters. And I caught a rare moment just a few weeks ago when all of our neighbors were out in the street talking to each other. It's not like here in the States. Here in the States, you might see a neighbor in their car and wave at them or something. That's kind of typical, seems like. I've been gone for a long time, so I really don't know. Not there. People are out and about, and so you have an opportunity to interact with people as well. As I mentioned, we live in southeastern Brazil, in an area that's called a metropolitan region of the Paraíba Valley and the mountain region as well. There are 33 municipalities, kind of like counties. Down there you don't have the difference between county seat and the county. It's all just one political area, the municipality. There are 33 of those, and we have congregations probably in about 4 of those 33. Our own city, São José dos Campos, is the capital of that region, and we're getting close to about 1 million in population. When Vicki and I moved there, we spent 10 years in the city of Belo Horizonte in another state, and then in 1994 to 95, we moved to this city. So in that time, when we moved there, the population was given as 423,000. And now it has close to 1 million people. So this is a city that's just exploding in population. When we moved into the house where we are now, there was no type of commercial business, not even a bread store. There was nothing. And now we have basically our own commercial center. There are denominations and churches and all sorts and gyms for you to go to. But there are about 4 million people in this region. And we've taken that on as kind of our work because there's nobody else really, when we went there, working in that region. So we're the only Americans there. We're the only full-time workers there. So we're trying to help people evangelize. We began a work in the city of Taubaté about 15 years ago, and that work continues with 2 brothers taking that on. They're military guys. And we helped another couple who saw what we were doing, and they went on down the highway toward Rio, toward the end of this region here, and began teaching their family members. And a congregation was begun there, and that congregation kind of needs some help. But we do work throughout all of Brazil. We also do publications that I'll mention here just in a minute. But this is kind of our home territory here. The work in São José began in 1988 with 2 Brazilian couples. We came along in 1994-95 because they were getting a very slow start. We were looking to make a move. We were looking to grow our publications. So we arrived after the work had actually started here. And as it turns out, neither one of those Brazilian couples continues in that particular area. I mentioned publications. This year, we have come out with 2 books. One of them is called Dictionary of Biblical Vocabulary, and this is the first little volume of that. It's a work that has been 25 years in the making. We have a lot of Brazilians and Americans in Brazil who have contributed, but it got to the point where we weren't able to finish it with just our people there. So I decided to go outside and get some other people to write for us. So you might have heard of Jack P. Lewis and Everett Ferguson. They're two of our contributors. So those two have already passed away, but I have articles by them that have never been published before that will be going into this dictionary here. And this is the very first type of publication of this nature in Brazil. And then on the right side here, a little book of outlines of the greatest subjects of the Bible. I did that on a Wednesday night in our study group in our home. And more recently, I've gone through this with Paulo, and I've kind of amplified it somewhat as we've gone along. So I dedicated this book to the congregation and to Paulo specifically. So he was real proud of that. And por falar nisso, eu tenho esses dois livros aí, quero te dar antes de você ir embora, tá bom? Okay. Pablo is here with us. He's a Brazilian. He came here to work, and he and Micah have become good friends, and we were together last night, and I hope you'll be sure and meet him. Você já esteve aqui umas 2-3 vezes, né? Okay. He's already visited here 2 or 3 times before. He started over in Chase Park. He moved here to Huntsville, and he saw the Chase Park building. That was the first church building he saw, and he said, I'm gonna start going there. And so he got to know Micah through that, and of course he and Micah speak a lot of Portuguese, so we enjoy getting to know Pablo. And I just told him that I have copies of these two, and I'm going to leave those with him before I leave today. We also publish a magazine. It's called Edificação. We're trying to keep it on a monthly basis here, and I've been publishing this for now like 20 plus years, 25 years or so in Brazil. It's more of a challenge today since we have the internet, but we still feel like there is a place for printed material. This is the only circulating magazine among our people in the country. We've had things in the past, and everything but this has fallen to the side. This is a world map that hangs on our wall above our sofa. It's like 30 years old. It was done when we lived in Belo Horizonte. So you can still see up there, if you can read, the Soviet Union. This was before the breakup of the Soviet Union. But we hang it up there. Do you know why? To remind us that the Church of Jesus Christ has been given a world mission. And each of us needs to do our part in God's Word, wherever we are. And Jesus also wants us to go forth. I looked at your website just a day or so ago. I looked at your missions page and saw that you support a lot of good people, doing a lot of good things in a lot of good places. And this may not be a reminder that you need. But we can say we are thankful to God for churches like you who see the need to go beyond our backyard and share the gospel the world over. And why is that? That's because I just want to go to heaven, like Paulo. And in order to do that, in order for us to be able to go to heaven, we need to take as many people with us as we can. Because that is our mission. We don't have any other mission. All other things that we can do may be good things, but they will not last. And if we want to leave a permanent legacy, an eternal inheritance in people's lives, this is what we can and must do, to teach the gospel to every creature. I want to thank you for this time this morning. I hope you've been encouraged by seeing that the gospel can and does save people. Sometimes we feel like nobody wants to hear the gospel anymore. People are interested in other things. That's true to a large degree, but there are people out there who will hear if we offer the gospel. Not just a conversation, but we need to sit down with people, open up the Word of God. We need to be prepared to teach. We need to have something up our sleeve that we can pull out. 35 years ago, we sat down and we prepared a study. We've done others since then, since that time, that we can sit down at a moment's notice And we can go through with people and teach them the gospel of Jesus Christ. We all need to be ready to do that. Each within his own ability, each within his own opportunity. Let me stop here. I think we have like 5 minutes or so. If anybody has a question, yes, sir.
What are your biggest challenges that you face culturally?
I'm sorry, I'm hard of hearing.
What are your biggest challenges you face culturally?
Our biggest challenges that we face culturally. That's a good question.
There's still nuances that are hard to, even after this whole time.
Nuances?
Yes.
Yeah, there are still, Vicki mentioned, there are still nuances in the culture that sometimes get us at times. But we don't have a lot of surprises anymore. But that's a good question. The economy, when we went to Brazil, the inflation was like 1,000% a month. When we bought our house in Belo Horizonte, we paid $4 million, and I don't even remember what the currency was back then because it changed 5 times within about 5 years. So, and that was a challenge. They would issue new bills, and so there would be 2 kinds of bills circulating. Some had a bunch of zeros on it, and then another bill would have 3 less zeros on it. And so you had to you had to keep up with all of that. That was a big challenge. And it was a big challenge and continues to be to explain to people the differences in Brazil and here. I would say our biggest challenge now is coming back to the States and relating to people here as Americans. I remember one time in Arkansas, that's where I'm from, going into a congregation and talking to a deacon there at the time. He's now an elder. And we were in the foyer. And here we were having a great conversation, a good guy. And I began to feel funny. Something was strange. And I thought, what's going on here? So I put up my antennas a little bit. And after a little while, it came to me. Americans have a large personal space. So when you talk to an American, you're going to stand back a long way. Brazilians don't. Brazilians kind of get in your face for an American. We have adopted Brazilian space, among other cultural items. So here I was, up in this guy's face, and it made him uncomfortable. And this was all subconscious. And he would take a step back so that he could be comfortable. Well, that made me uncomfortable because he was a long way away. So I would take a step close to him. And then he would be uncomfortable again. And he would take a step back. Neither of us really noticing what was going on. And I would be uncomfortable after he took a space back, so I would take a space forward. I chased him around the entire foyer because of this cultural difference. So I would say today our cultural challenge is here in the United States because we have so adapted our lifestyle, our way of speaking and doing to Brazil. So I don't know if that's a good answer or not. Yeah. Yes, sir.
How long have you been concentrating on the home church or house church concept?
Since 2014. We began in January of that year in our home. And so we left the congregation that was there already. We continue to maintain really good relationships. Sometimes I go over there and preach and teach. We have events together. Vicki goes to their ladies' day. So we have full fellowship together. Not a problem.
Have you spawned off any more home churches?
Not yet. Not yet. That's why we're looking at Jacareí. And as I said, if it had depended upon me, we would have begun that work already. But they're the ones who really have to decide that. So that has not started as of yet. But we also have people who live on the north side of town, people who live on the south, and I'm also trying to condition them to think in terms of one day you could begin a congregation in your home. So prepare yourself. You do what you need to do. Learn how to teach. And most of the people that we baptized from the very beginning already are leading prayer. We have Lord's Supper devotionals and offering meditations. And so we get the guys involved just almost off the bat. Conscious of not to not to lay hands precipitously on people, but trying to work that. So, good question. One more question, if anybody has one. Yes, ma'am.
So are you planning on staying there forever, or are you going to come back to the United States?
We get that question a lot. Are we planning on staying in Brazil forever or coming back to the United States? We have 3 married children and 5 grandchildren here in the States. And with Layla being married now, we're expecting some more, hopefully. But do you think that I just put together a home office to run off and leave it? That's usually what I tell people in a good way. We plan to stay in Brazil as long as it is possible. We don't have any plans of coming back. Perhaps at some point in the future, our health may get to a point to where we may need children close by or something. Only the Lord knows. But at this point, no plans of coming back. Okay. I think we got time for one more. Has the first bell rung? It hasn't? Oh, maravilha. Anybody else have a question? There it is, first bell. So we have 3 minutes. Okay, one more question.
Do your children and grandchildren come to visit you, or do they look forward to that or plan that in their life?
Do our children and grandchildren come to visit us? Not as much as we would like. We have been coming back to the States a little bit more because we have weddings and we have grandchildren being born and whatnot. I mentioned that our son Joel and his family lived with us, not with us, but came to Brazil and spent almost a year there from 2017 to 2018. And so that was the very first time that we ever had any of our grandchildren close by. So that was a very special time for us, and we enjoyed that. So I don't know. Each of them has their life here and their own constraints in terms of finances and all of that. So, yeah, but our door is always open. Did you hear that? Anybody else? We also have an active presence on the internet, both in Portuguese and in English. And if you'd like to check us out, our ministry mission site is at GoSpeak.org. We have a magazine at forthright.net. We publish books in English as well. We have people like Phil Sanders who have contributed at one point or another, both to the magazine and to the books we publish. And we're trying to keep up with brotherhoodnews.com. We have a sister in southern Alabama who posts news from her area down there at times, and a group blog at fellowshiproom.com. And we try to keep up with all of this. It's kind of a challenge. For non-Christians in Brazil, we have the website cristãos.org that is geared specifically toward non-Christians. And for the brethren, we have the website irmãos.org, and we also have a devotional site as well that's not on here. Everybody in Brazil is on WhatsApp. I don't know if you've heard of that or not. It's owned by Facebook, and it allows you on your smartphone to communicate with everybody. I think I was the last person in Brazil to join. I still had a little flip-up phone until earlier this year. But the brethren and the brethren there in Urbanova, which is where we live, had put together a group for the congregation, and Vicki and I were on the outside. So we thought we better get in on this because they're going to start talking about us. So, but we also use that and try to maintain communication through the internet and in other ways to encourage people. So you're welcome to go and take a look at any of that. Once again, I hope that you have been encouraged by this news that the gospel will reach people. It reached you. And you can be used by God to reach others as well. And all of that can be summed up by saying, where do we want to go from here? I just want to go to heaven. Thank you.
see if one of our new children. From my perspective, you're the same desk. I go there. Brad Forrest.
You got